Hi, everyone. This is Wally with Supreme Gecko, and this has been a dream of mine to have this person on. I've known Paul online, not personally, for years and years and years, and respected so much of what he's done, not just with the reptiles, but also with the community, but especially with gargoyle geckos. Today, we're going to talk about gargoyle geckos. We're going to get in depth with some great information from Paul. I am really looking forward to this session, and I hope you will too. I hope you gain a lot of information from this because Paul is, I feel, one of the top, if not the top gargoyle producers and experts in the hobby today. So this is going to be fun. It's going to be educational. It's going to be such a great session. Paul, thank you very, very much for joining us. It's my honor to have you on our show.
Thank you. Wow, that was a heck of an introduction.
Well
Thank you very
deserved.
much.
Well deserved, my friend. We met recently at NARBC in
Yeah.
Chicago, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, we might have crossed paths in the past, but I think that was our
We have.
first, chit chat that we did in person, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Uh, So to start things off, and I like to do this in a little bit different way than most people, most interviewers do. A lot of times people jump right into the animals. Tell me about gargoyle geckos. Well, I want to know about Paul. I want to know, what are your hobbies? What are your interests? Tell me a little bit about your, I don't know, is this your full-time job? Your family? Whatever you want to tell us about Paul that will help us kind of identify with you.
I'm just a gecko dude that likes geckos a lot. I, I do other things. I surf, fish. I've got a pretty nice garden. Gardening is probably my peaceful place. Yeah, I mean, that's, in all honesty, especially the last couple of years, geckos are it is what I do for a living. And it's pretty much what I do 7 days a week, 20 hours a day. Pretty much.
Was that a tough transition to get into reptiles full time?
No. Well, yes and no. It's tough to make the leap, right? But to get into it full time, no, because honestly, it was kind of a gradual. Excuse me, it was a gradual thing for me. It started as a hobby, and me personally, I'm a how and why person, right? So when I keep the animals and I observe certain things, I really have an interest in trying to understand how they're doing these things and why they're doing these things. And, that just kind of grew. It started with bearded dragons. That was probably the first animal that I was breeding on a large scale. And that got the foot in the door to work with Bob Mayu from Sandfire Dragon Ranch. And really, for me, that's how this RhacHouse pretty much started.
How long ago was that?
Wow. Well, I guess in the mid 90s, mid 90s, I want to say, maybe early 90s.
Does that
Yeah.
seem like a long time ago?
Yes and no. I mean, it time goes by fast. The older you get, the faster it goes. But when you try to, when I try to recall those times, yeah, that was a long time. I was a completely different person, and it was a long time ago.
A lot of changes in the hobby in the last 10 years, but going back
Certainly.
30 years, that's an incredibly different world.
Totally different.
Totally different. Tell me a little bit about, I'm going to jump back a little bit. Tell me about your collection right now. Give our viewers and myself a little bit of an insight into all the animals, all the different animals that you're keeping, the size of your collection. How much time does it take to manage your collection?
Well, like I said, I'm out there 7 days a week, and I feel like I'm constantly behind. Um, the problem I have here in Florida, I started RhacHouse in New Jersey, and it's a little bit colder up there. I found a way to keep them quite easily, and I kind of thought that when I was going to move back to Florida, it would be easier. It is not. It is actually more difficult to keep them here because I'm constantly running an air conditioner, the heat. heat's a dehumidifier, so I'm battling myself constantly. That's probably the biggest transition in from the move anyway. I forgot what was the question again.
No. That's fine. Kind of give us, and I can appreciate that, and I'm thinking in my head too, back to the question, because I was already thinking two questions ahead.
Yeah.
Because, you moved down to Florida. We'll come back to that question in just a second, but you moved down to Florida and you're keeping these New Caledonias, and everybody says you should keep New Caledonias in the 70s. What the heck? Moving to Florida? I mean,
Well,
you
no,
know,
actually, I would disagree with the idea of the 70s, to be honest with you. Um,
yes,
all right, so this is going to go on a whole nother rant. My number one complaint in keeping the new cow geckos, particularly that I see online, because things get parroted very quickly online, is the idea of the humidity and keeping these animals. What is recommended online? I see almost everything recommends, 70, 75% when you spray, and then let it dry out to 50%. And my biggest argument for that is, show me anywhere in New Caledonia where the humidity goes from 80% to 50%, probably twice in one day, because most people are spraying twice a day. That doesn't happen. I get the argument all the time that, people have gone there and they take a hydrometer with them and they take a reading from a specific area and it's 50% humidity. Well, okay, I can argue that point too, because here in Florida, we have high humidity, but it's not always high. There are times when it is 50%. All right. So a day or a spot or a one certain condition is not a valid argument in my point. What we should be looking at is annual averages. That's what's way more important. And when you look at the annual averages in New Caledonia, the annual average is in the mid 70s. The annual average low is 70. All right, so right off the bat, if you start if you do an annual average, if you know anything about math, that tells me right off the bat that it almost never goes below 70%. Then you take that and you look at these animals, the differences between these and, say, a leopard gecko or bearded dragon or any other geckos that we're keeping, and their skin texture,
yeah,
particularly. I think these animals are evolved to absorb moisture. Their skin is a sponge. And when you don't keep consistent humidity, they are constantly drying out and rehydrating, drying out and rehydrating. Now, back to temperature. If you have an animal that has evolved to the averages of mid 70s, okay, so that's completely fair. Mid to upper 70s is the sweet spot, but that is not always the case. In New Caledonia, it gets into the 60s and it gets into the 90s. All right, so the idea that these animals can't handle it, those temperatures, in my opinion, is wrong if you have the correct humidity. If your humidity is not correct and you're
yes,
bouncing all over the place, then by God, don't take these animals over 80 degrees because you will cook them.
yes, exactly. Um, there, it's hard. It's hard, Paul. And we deal with this here at Supreme Gecko every single day with um, what should my humidity be for my crested geckos? What should my humidity be for my chondrodactylus? And my answer isn't, well, it should be 74.62783. It depends, man. It
Right.
depends so much on how you're keeping them, how often you're checking them, how often you just mentioned many people spray twice a day. It depends on so many other factors. Don't give me a general question without filling in the blanks below it, because I'm going to come right back and I have forms, that I can use that I can preload and say, here's the information I need to help with your question later. But give us a kind of a general idea of your collection size,
It,
just to give a reference to people.
obviously it varies time of year. Um, between 1,000 and 2,000 animals, generally speaking.
That's a lot of
Pets, and
animals.
that's everything. That's my pets. Because my tortoise, I do some tortoises, but I would consider those more pets than a project per se. But that's everything. Yeah. during the height of the year, I've got a lot of babies out, and that makes up a huge part of that number for sure.
Yes, 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 yes. And again, we're going to talk about lighting and humidity and temperatures and baby care in just a couple of minutes. So folks, stay tuned to this. This is going to be incredibly important. Gargoyles. What got you into gargoyles? Why gargoyles? Why not Paul, why not Periodora picta? You should have gotten more
I
into
love the Picta
period.
too.
That's my passion, but why gargoyles?
You know what? This might sound a little ridiculous. Okay. Um, when I was working at Sandfire, just before that little stint ended, I was working a full-time job. At that time I was the retail sales rep for Sandfire, so I was handling all of their retail sales. On top of that, I was producing my own dragons, and I was producing about 8,000 dragons a year. So taking care of that many dragons, it's quite a bit of work. And in all honesty, I got burned out.
Yeah.
I got to the point where I couldn't keep up, and I didn't want to do it. So I was out of reptiles for about a year and a half. And every time I'd go somewhere and see a reptile, it would tear me up inside. And so I made my promise. I made myself a promise. I said, all right, I do this again, I won't ever get into the position where I'm overwhelmed. That's a very big deal. I'm also the kind of person, like I said, I need to know why and how. And in order to learn those type of things, I learned very early on that you can't do that by keeping one or two of any specific animal. You have to keep many of those animals. So keeping a large collection was always, kind of par for me. And the Rhacodactylus, all the new cows, they're not all Rhacodactylus anymore, but the new cows was the easy answer. Not only were they great pets to start off with, and you've been around long enough, and that's where the hobby went from being able to go to an expo and get literally anything you want, to going to an expo and finding like the 10 most popular pet animals there are.
Yes.
And so all of the new cow animals are great pets. They're very easy to keep. I can keep 2,000 of them myself. Granted, it takes a lot of work, but I can do it. I'm not overwhelmed. And I love them. I mean, the personality, every single animal is different. Yeah, I mean, Gargoyle is one. They're the most
Why?
confident. Really, that's kind of what made me pick those over anybody else. The confidence.
Okay. And that makes all the sense in the world. And so why gargoyles? And again, I'm going to point out, folks, we're talking to one of the top one or two or three uh, most well-known gargoyle experts in the country, in the world. I feel maybe I don't know the whole world, but a
Yeah.
huge respect for you, Paul. But why gargoyles and why not crested geckos or chihuahuas? Why not Ceratosaurums? Why gargoyles specifically?
The confidence, right? They were so right about this time too. Um, I wanted to keep some venomous animals, and my partner
Oh,
at the time, obviously wasn't for it too much, and we made a deal that and again, I still had lots of animals, but at this time I had a lot of 2 3 of different stuff. I had a little bit of everything. I said, if I treat everything as it's venomous and I don't get bit, can I have it? I want an eyelash viper. I was like, would you allow one in the house? And she agreed to it. So the next year I treated my leopard geckos. I treated every single animal I had as if it was venomous. What that taught me was how to read the body language and how to talk to the animals, right? How to understand what they were saying.
yes.
Um, and now when I started taking care of the gargoyles and I started treating them in that same manner and understanding, basically talking to them, they were much easier to teach. They were much easier to earn their trust. And they, in my opinion, they're probably one of the coolest reptiles there are. You can, that you can literally very easily have a relationship with the animal where it is your friend,
Yes.
quite
Yes.
simply.
I feel gargoyles are different than the other nucales. Very different.
Mhm.
I think Cirrus and Crusties have their own unique, I don't know, attraction. But gargoyles are just different. They're calmer. They're I don't know, easier to work with, in my opinion. But they also have special treats or traits as well. Um, so let's get into for our viewers that are just learning about gargoyles. And I tell you what, folks, I think gargoyles are such a hot, if you're into it from a pet standpoint, if you're into it from a, I hate to say it like this, but from a business standpoint, you're raising animals to sell at reptile shows. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But I think gargoyles are super, super exciting right now in the hobby and very, very popular because of some of the colors that have come out,
Certainly.
because of more exposure that has come out. Um, so we're going to dig down into the details of caring for your gargoyles. Paul, just kind of give us a rundown on the general care of a gargoyle. Just kind of talk through the enclosure. How do you set up an enclosure for a gargoyle? Kind of walk us through the substrate, the decorations, the basic information, heating, lighting, anything that you can think of, if you don't mind. I'll see if I can kind of follow some notes here that I have if you miss anything.
I'll try to like cover the whole, because everybody's needs are different, right? Breeders
Yes.
don't have the same needs as a pet keeper. Um, so usually when I'm at the shows and I'm trying to describe to people the nuts and bolts, right? What does a
Yes.
gargoyle require, right? In parentheses, what does it require in order to thrive? And I think that's also one of the beautiful things about the Rhacodactylus, because they don't require a whole lot. They don't require specifics like some of the leaf tails, like some of the other geckos. Um, they don't care about textures. They don't care about visual aesthetics. What they care about is food, water, obviously, and in order, I would even put right humidity, the proper temperature, something to hide in, something that's tight and dark that they have to squeeze into, and something to climb on. And essentially, if you provide those things, you're going to have a happy animal. Then on top of that, right, depending on what your needs are, then there's other ways of doing it. Um, I'll be the first one to say that UV is a benefit, but these animals definitely do not require it. And in fact, I think the last talk in Tinley, I didn't get to attend it, but I heard the rumors going around that there's evidence that these animals, particularly New Caledonia geckos, and this wouldn't go for every species, but because of the nature of New Caledonia and the mineral-rich soil that is there, that a lot of their D3 and these other vitamins might actually be coming more from the environment, right? So their food sources and such, rather than say the sun, processing from sunlight. These animals definitely bask, especially particularly gargoyles. I've seen gargoyles basking, but here's the question, and I see it online. I see people say this all the time, but here's the question I would pose to that, and I don't know how to prove it. When they are basking, are they basking because of the UV, or are they basking because of the temperature? And I've done some experiments that would lead me to believe that almost every case they're basking because of temperature, not necessarily because of the UV.
Is that, and we're going to keep talking about enclosures because I have some specifics here, but I want to follow up on that.
Mm-hmm.
Are your findings in your mind um, establishing because you have different like gradients established in your enclosures
Yeah.
and they're kind of going toward more of a heat source than a UV source, if I'm
Well,
saying that right?
it comes from it comes from experimenting a little bit, and it comes from multiple situations. Um, we'll start off when I was in New Jersey. All right, I did not have any lights on my animals in New Jersey whatsoever, but all of my adults sat. It was a rack that was directly in front of a west-facing picture window. All right. So after about 12:30 or so, that entire adult rack would be getting direct sunlight. And it wasn't uncommon for me to walk in the room and all these animals would be basking in the sunlit areas. My windows are UV protected, so they're not basking for UV. When I temp them out with the laser gun, all right, so I can temp the space, I can temp the surface they're laying on, and the animal. And the animal would sometimes temp in the upper 80s, almost 90 degrees, and still behaving like a totally normal animal. So
Wow.
that would lead me to believe that it's not about the UV, it's about the temperature.
I have to agree with you. And I'm not saying that UV isn't. I'll go back to what you said. Is not a benefit. It is a benefit.
It is.
Um, but that heat, um, and they're going to get their D3 from other sources, in my mind as well. But that heat is such a critical factor. We talk about enrichment. We talk about adding toys to their enclosures, to our animals' enclosures, and it's just like, oh my gosh, enrichment. Um, I feel that the subject that we should be talking about is exactly what you're talking about, and that's gradients. Let's stop talking about enrichment because it is important, but it's not the key here. It's gradients. Give them a choice. You're talking about 80s. You're talking about almost 90 degrees that they have available. And guess what? They're going to that and they're utilizing it. Um, so, if the whole enclosure is 88 degrees, maybe that's not a good thing. But if
That's
they
not a good
have
thing.
the ability to go, yeah, maybe. Why did I say maybe? Um, but if they have the ability to choose for a while, let me sit in 88, and now I've utilized that. Now let me go back and hide for a while. I think that's the important thing, in our ability to keep these animals better.
Yeah, but in order for that to happen, you have to have the proper humidity. Right.
Yes, yes,
For these guys.
yeah,
Because if that humidity is low, you are so the point that I always try to stress, and this goes across all the new Caledonian geckos, and because this is where I get the most pushback is with the humidity. The requirement is high humidity, but not a wet enclosure. All right. And I think that's where this dry out period idea, came from originally, because when we first started doing care sheets, we would say spray 2, 3, 25 times a day, whatever, followed by a dry out. Meaning that you don't want the surfaces of the enclosure to be, because you're using a spray bottle, right? So
yes.
you are wetting the surfaces. You're not adding humidity with a spray bottle. You're wetting the surfaces, and then that moisture evaporates, and that's how you get the humidity. The problem with that whole scenario is with these particular animals, you do not want wet surfaces.
Yes. How do you achieve that? And let's
Not easy.
weave this together. How do you achieve the required humidity? And talk to us about your substrate, because I think that probably has something to do with it, right?
Well, for me, because I've got a lot of animals, because I am sending animals out all over the world, simplicity is a big one.
Yes.
Cleanliness is another one, right? So
Yes.
my particular setups are more of a sterile type of setup. I use paper products for everything. Paper towel and newspapers, my substrates, um, egg crates are my primary furniture. That way I just throw everything out and replace it with new stuff.
Yep.
Um, that also supplies when decorating. All right, so I'm going to skip over here a little bit. When giving space to an animal, and furniture, these are all arboreal. Okay, so in my opinion, the most important thing is the volume of surface area inside the enclosure. That's more important than anything. These guys, over and over, I stand by smaller enclosures for these guys. I see all over the internet minimum sizes. Um, while there can be minimum and maximum sizes, I'm not going to argue that. But I think overwhelmingly, because I've done the experiments, I've kept animals small, I've kept animals big, and there is clearly a difference, and
Yes.
smaller is better. But that doesn't mean less space if you provide lots of surface area inside the enclosure. Yeah, so that goes across the board though. You supply those things, and like I said, those temperatures aren't a threat, and those temperatures are actually good. I would argue.
I'll relate it to day geckos. And this is kind of a weird analogy, but day geckos, you put a plant in the enclosure, you'll never see your day gecko. Oh, I want to see it, so I don't want a lot of plants in my enclosure. I want to see my day geckos, so I'll put one plant in so I can see them when they come out. Never see them. Put 4 or 5 plants in the enclosure, and all of a sudden they're always at the
They're
front.
out
They're
everywhere.
always on the side. They're always on the leaves because they feel comfortable, and they
Yes,
like you're saying, they can utilize that surface area, and just know that they can jump into a leaf without any problems and be protected and
sure.
and be hidden.
You know what?
The
I think for the new cow stuff, I think that's a big deal. That's a good point worth going into, right? So online, a lot of enclosures that I see, in my opinion, they don't, especially for crested geckos. I see this a lot with crested geckos, and they don't provide what I would consider a suitable hide. Crested geckos are the one new cow gecko. They're on the menu till they're adults, and that's why they behave the way they do. They're nervous and they're scared. And so, if you think about it for a second, under a leaf, right? So I see a lot of enclosures that have a lot of plants, and people are like, "This is my gecko likes to hide under a leaf." I would argue that in most of those enclosures, they're hiding under a leaf because they don't have another option. That's the only option left. If you were a crested gecko and you had a Leachianus hunting you at night, you don't want to hide under a leaf because a lychee can get you that way. You want to hide in something that you have to squeeze your body into. That's what the crested geckos, young gargoyles are looking for the same thing. You provide them those spots, they feel safe. If they feel safe in the enclosure, they spend more time out and about. And then they're also much more likely to be in that positive state of mind to befriend you and start to trust you when you take them out and handle them. And you know what? You can say that about any animal, really.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm kind of thinking through, should I bring it up now or wait until we talk about babies? I'm going to wait until we talk about babies.
Okay.
Let, uh, because we could go off on 100 tangents here, but
I'm
talking
guilty.
about
If I do that, stop me. I'm
I
very
know,
guilty of it.
me too. Um, when we talk about adults, we're talking about enclosures, we're talking about size-ish. Um, as a general point, I say about 30 gallons or so. And everybody is different, but again, it depends on how much decorations you have, how your
How
how
much
your
surface area you have.
how much surface area you have, things like that. So there's so many different factors. Um, you just mentioned for your substrate you're using because you're a breeder, and a breeder is somebody that's different. I'm a breeder as well, so I don't have a 30-gallon enclosure, bioactive, one animal. I can't if
Right.
I want to keep other animals as well. Plastic or glass or screen. What do you think, Paul?
Again, that comes up to your personal needs for the most part. Me personally, I highly recommend. If you're not building, usually what I tell my customers, if you're not trying to make a display and your
Yeah.
concerns are primarily keeping the animal healthy and happy, then I highly recommend plastic. It does a better job overall in so many ways. Um, you, you it, if you don't go plastic, um, because humidity is the number one aspect of care for these guys, the enclosure's got to hold humidity. It has that's a requirement. All the exoteric cages, all these enclosures, these glass enclosures with the screen top, they don't hold humidity. So those are not we can modify those and make it work. But something like that would not be my first choice. Some of the acrylic enclosures are nice, but my problem with those many times, unless you have it custom made, is the ventilation. All right. So one
Yes.
of my things that I'm preaching is high humidity. All right. And the biggest kickback I get is respiratory and infection and, bacteria buildup and all these kind of things. And I stand firm in the belief that it is not high humidity that causes those things. It is high humidity with the lack of air circulation. And so if your tubs or your enclosures, what I found over the years now, are not ventilated in a certain way, that promotes some air circulation, then you do have problems, with those kind of things. Which is kind of why I like the plastic tubs. You can ventilate them your way, and it minimizes those issues.
Tell me how you're ventilating your plastic tubs. I think I know, but just so everybody is on the same page, because I
I,
think I'm doing the same thing.
I only do it on two sides ever, not on four sides. It has to be only on two sides, and they are staggered from each other. So on one side is basically as high in the enclosure as you can get it, and on the opposite side, it is as low as you can get it. That way, the enclosure, as the air warms in the enclosure, it is forced out the top vents, and it sucks cooler air in the bottom vents. Promotes some air circulation, and if you have that solid top, it still holds humidity, but promotes some air circulation.
Perfect. 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 Of anything in this presentation here, that's such a key piece of
It is,
information.
absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that. How often are you misting? And again, folks, it's going to be different for every single person
Sure.
here. But how often are you misting?
It varies. To be 100%, what I do and what my goal is are not always the same, right? Because what I do has to adapt to the conditions.
Yes.
My goal is not to spray because I do
Yeah.
not want a wet enclosure. The reality is because I use paper products. I mean, I do have to spray the enclosures to some degree, and I typically do that when I feed. And basically, it's just a quick spurt. I run a humidifier. Again, because my situation is a little different, I have a building for the animals. So I run an industrial humidifier, commercial humidifier in the building that keeps it around 75%. And that varies because it depends on, what it is outside. When it's hot, like right now, it's been really hot. So the air conditioner is working overtime. So my humidity is a little bit on the lower side. I have to spray a little more often, but then I also have the paper products, which means that I'm changing my enclosure very, very often.
Huge point.
Yeah,
Huge.
yeah.
Huge.
See, the one thing I want to point out, which I don't
Yeah.
think gets said enough, kind of the reason I get long-winded is because I need to know why for everything, right? I can't give instructions without telling you why. So the problem with these, the reason you don't want a wet enclosure is if you watch these, I know you've seen it. This speaking to any of the newcomers for these guys. If you watch
Yep.
these animals, particularly if you bring a new animal home and you set it up, they rub their butt on everything in the enclosure. And what they're doing is they're scent marking everything in the enclosure. And they do that every time they walk on something. So personally, I think it's a chemical GPS. So they understand, where home is, where the food is, where all that stuff is in relationship.
Yep.
They're also peeing and pooping on everything they're walking on. Now, going back to their skin is a sponge. It's absorbing moisture directly from the air. If they are sitting on wet surfaces, their body is absorbing that moisture. If the surfaces are wet, the water is picking up the scent mark, it's picking up the feed, it's picking up all the bacteria, basically.
Everything.
All
Yep.
right. And then the animal is absorbing that water. So the animal is absorbing the water and that bacteria. This is why it is so important not to have a wet enclosure. High humidity, but not wet. Usually I prefer foggers. I tell people I recommend a fogger over a spray bottle. But foggers don't work in every situation. They
Yes.
just don't.
Yes. Our good friends Will and Audra from Flawless Crusted Geckos say over and over again that when I see an interview with them, and I try to watch them all because they're leading edge a lot of times. They say we don't mist. We don't mist at all, and it's a hard concept for me to wrap my mind around because we're required to mist here at least once a day just to keep that humidity up, and then next morning it's already gone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just because of our situation, because the animals are down in the basement, and because I have not just gargoyles but crusted geckos and desert animals, so I have to treat each rack differently.
Sure.
Um, but it's sounding like that's what you strive for as well, is to not have to mist if you don't have to.
I
Um,
don't want to.
yeah, 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 yeah. So, for us that have to, let's understand that we don't want the surfaces always wet and dry. We at least want to mist and then have them dry out, and not make them wet. Just give a little bit just to grab that
Well,
humidity up a little bit, right?
here's where I would say if you're chasing your tail with the humidity like that,
And I am.
this is where you should maybe check your enclosure and maybe go to something that holds humidity a little more efficiently.
Yep. Good point. Really good point. Look at your ventilation. Um, Look at your enclosure. Great, great points. Make sure that you have that cross ventilation, but then try to balance it a little bit.
Right.
Your point was really spot on with the tops that are all screen, and if you're struggling with humidity, that's probably a big reason right there.
It's a very big one. But that's also an easy fix with those. You can put a towel over it, replace it with plexiglass, wrap it in
Plexiglass.
saran wrap.
Yes.
The only problem that I have with that now, those cages are actually designed to ventilate the same way that I just described for our tubs.
Yep.
The only problem when you cover up that top is you kind of destroy that to some degree. Um, I still recommend poking a couple holes in it, right? It shouldn't be a completely solid top in that situation, but it does still affect how the air circulation functions in those enclosures.
Perfect. Talking about humidity, do you provide, and this sounds like a strange question, but do you provide water dishes? For
For every,
years, what's
every
that?
single animal I have has a water dish. I don't care if it comes from the desert. I don't care where it comes from.
Let's talk about food. I don't know if there's anything from an enclosure standpoint that I missed here. Decorations could be anything from cork bark to egg cartons. We use a lot of egg cartons. I think we've kind of covered that
I'd
pretty
recommend
much.
the cork bark for surface area. You know, I have a when I do the shows, I have the example on my iPad. So not all of my adult enclosures are the same. Some of my tubs are from the very beginning, so they're still 20 years old. So a good portion of my adult breeding tubs are quite small. All right, so our Exoterras, the standard one, are what 12, 18, I think they are,
Yeah,
is pretty
yeah.
standard. So an egg crate is 12 by 12. My breeder tubs just fit egg crates dimensionally. So my tubs are like 13 by like 40, 36 or 40, something like that. So if you now, just to put the image in your head, basically, if you can imagine the size of the Exoterra, right, a 12, 12, 18. Many people will tell you that's good for one animal, but you put more animals in there, no bueno. I actually keep 5 animals in something that size. 1.4
Ah,
is typically what I keep. And
holy cow.
I'll tell you why that makes sense. All right. So inside of that dimension, okay, I use 7 egg crates go into the enclosure in that dimension. 7 each egg crate is a square foot. So my animals have 7 square feet of space. Okay. And if I really want to get nitty gritty, each one of the egg crates has a double side. So I could even argue that the egg crates provide 14 square feet of usable, climbable space. But you see what I'm saying, right? So it's
Yeah.
not necessarily with these guys, it's not necessarily the outside dimensions of the enclosure that's what I feel is important. It's the amount of usable, climbable space within the enclosure.
Okay, now I have to ask. I'm going to take that question about feeders and what you feed your animals. I'm going to put it over here for just a second, and I have to ask. So you cohabitate your animals? Doesn't
My
Facebook say
breeders,
that's a terrible thing to do?
breeders, yeah.
Terrible, Paul. Come on. What are you
Mm.
thinking?
Breeders are together all year. Now,
We do too.
if they're not breeding, then every single animal in my collection has its own enclosure.
Yep.
If it's not being bred, but for my Rhacodactylus, anything that's breeding or any of the new cow geckos, that's breeding, once they go together, they are together all year long.
So I'm going to bring out the contention to cohabitation because I have an answer and I know I'll guarantee you have the same answer and we're going to share this answer. But if you can't they harm won't they bite off each other's tails? why would you cohabitate with that risk? It's just safer to keep them separate.
Yes, if you have a pet and you want that pet to be perfect, do not put it with another animal. Period. But I'm not being cruel. What they do, the way they breed is the way they breed. It has nothing to do with me, and they are rough. But you got to remember, thin skin, all right, and sharp teeth. Gargoyles are not cresteds. Gargoyles are carnivores. They have
Yes.
teeth like very similar to most snakes, or even sharks if you want, because they're pointed and recurved.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so bites on these animals, they are rough. Bites do damage, and if you are breeding, expect damage. There is no way around it.
And I'll same exact thing, same exact thing. This is how it is. And I'll also take it to the point, if I don't like to get into arguments on Facebook or anything, but if somebody contacts me personally and says, I'm really confused about this matter, why do you cohabitate? You really shouldn't, because they harm to. I'll go back to, do you not think that that's what happens in nature? Do you not think that they get together in nature and maybe sometimes bite off a tail, or like you're saying, maybe a little damage on their skin? That's how nature works. It's
Sure.
just how it
Well,
is.
okay, but see, I would even come back to that because if the people, I hate to put classes and like put people into you know stereotypes and whatever,
Yeah, yeah,
but generally the people that are asking those type of questions are also the people that are not providing the surface area for the animal, right? You have a bunch of foliage and you have like one branch or two branches. Again, okay, so when you put two animals together, they're competing for resources. The number one thing is going to be space. All right.
yes,
So if all you have, these are arboreal, if all you have is one branch in there and that branch is only an inch wide, then these animals are both competing for, I mean, what? We're talking about an inch worth of space. And so does your likelihood of conflict go way up in those situations? Absolutely, it does. One of the
yes.
reasons I use the egg crate, all right? I have had people come at me before and, why do you use egg crate? That's not what they climb on in the wild. No, because what you're not understanding is by keeping them the way that I do. So everything that I've done has been a series of failures and then correcting that failure. Okay.
Yes,
And that's
yes.
how I came to the egg crates. So surface area, as I already mentioned, is a huge one because the egg crates provide more surface area than almost anything else that you can put in there. Plus, they're easy to get rid of and just swap out. The second reason the egg crates, especially for the gargoyles, are awesome if you're breeding, right? And that's your goal as breeding, is when you put the egg crates together, when you like you would in a roach colony, you stand them
Yep,
up back to back.
yep.
Um, all the egg crates create these inch wide, if you will, tunnels that are vertical and horizontal. Basically, only one animal can fit inside of there. So when they argue side to side, right? So the aggressor comes from the side or the back. If you have a large open enclosure, again, this comes to hides. Okay, this is why squeezing into things is important. If you have large open spaces, then there is literally nowhere under a leaf. It's not somewhere to hide because the pursuing gecko can still get to them. So within the egg crates, no matter where they are, because that takes up the entire space of my enclosure, they're literally 2 or 3 steps away from going up into one of these tunnels that the pursuer cannot follow. Right. So, and I don't want to say it's perfect because it's not 100% perfect, but does it squash most of the arguments right then and there? It does. It does. If you do the same thing in your enclosures, whether you only have, even if they're only two pets and you want to keep them together, the biggest, most important thing I would say is provide lots of surface area, number one, and provide lots of hides that only one animal can fit into. So if they are arguing, there's a place for that animal to go and the other animal can't get to it.
I think sometimes doing this for many years, I tend to miss points like that, and I'll tell people, "Oh, you have to put a high Pachyodactylus, little sand gecko. You have to put hides in." And then somebody will say, "Well, how does this look? Send me a picture." And it's one of these big, foot by foot by foot
Sure.
hides in a big, 5-inch hole. And it's like, oh, I know that's not right. I should have told them better in the beginning. Just give them a flower pot
Yes,
saucer and a little niche and make it small so they can feel the
yes,
surface. Again, they're tight.
yeah,
I'm trying to say the same thing that you're saying. To make it tight so that they feel secure and nothing can get around them.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a big, huge, that's a big, huge part of keeping us for to be fair, most keepers nowadays, they're they're pets.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, especially if we're talking cresteds, right? The gargoyles, I think I see a lot of newcomers at the shows when I'm with the public, but I also see a lot of crested people are now getting interested in the gargoyles. And
Yes.
and seeing that, online, there's a lot of information that says gargoyles and cresteds are the same, and they're not. How they are the same is they both want tight and dark hides, and they both want lots of space. They're all the same in that respect.
Perfect. Perfect. Great examples. Great examples. I'm trying to think if there's anything that we're missing from the enclosure standpoint. Let's jump into food.
Mm-hmm.
What do you feed your gargoyles?
Rapashi.
Ah.
Rapashi.
So is it 100% Repashy?
No, you you've been in the game long. I mean, I don't know if you were doing cresteds from back then, but the cycle of one of the benefits that I have when it comes to this is I've seen how things have kind of played out, right, in the long term. Um, because I worked for Sandfire, because Alan was the guy who basically
Uh-huh.
introduced me into these animals, obviously I had some loyalty to Alan in that respect.
Sure.
Um, Alan, when he did the diets, the animals don't love his diet. Bottom line, they don't eat it because they like it. They will eat it because they're hungry and they need to eat. His diet was formulated specifically with before his diet came along. We were feeding baby food, and we'd
Yeah.
have to weigh the animals. We'd have to weigh out a vitamin, a mineral supplement. We'd have to weigh out a calcium supplement. Weigh the animal, do all the math, and to be honest with you, it didn't work.
No.
So his motivation for the diet was nutrition, strictly nutrition. And I got to hand it to him because he did a hell of a job with that. And not like I'm banging on Pangea, but when Pangea came out, I'm sure part of their motivation was to fill the gap because by then Alan already had a reputation for a lot of animals not really wanting to eat it. And I had the same problem, man. I'd mix fresh fruit into it to get them to eat it most of the time. When Pangea came out, I offered it to a handful of my animals, and they cleaned their dishes the first time round, and I was floored. I switched everything over to Pangea. Now, mind you, I'm specifically talking about gargoyles because this is the vast
Ah,
majority of my collection.
good point.
Um, I did not see these issues with cresteds, okay, but I did see them in my gargoyles and my Chihuahua at the time. I didn't keep Leachianus at that time. When I switched over to Pangea, simply because they all cleared the bowls, they all loved it. Every animal I gave to ate it like crazy. I thought it was the greatest thing. My animals were fat, they were healthy looking. But then when I went through the breeding cycle, I had issues, and that I did not see with Repashy. So I ended up going back to the Repashy. Those issues went away, which led me to my next little experiment. Right, I took groups of animals, raised them on different flavors of Pangea for the first 4 or 5 months. The same thing with Repashy. Weighed them out every couple days, and cross-referenced everything. And without a doubt, when it comes to gargoyles, the carnivores, the
Yeah.
gargoyles, the Leachianus, um, I I don't recommend Pangea be the staple. I'm not saying don't feed Pangea; it has a
Yeah.
place, but I don't recommend it as the staple.
Do you think that is it the formulation? Does it have anything to do with the
It's a sugar.
protein?
I think it's the sugar
Okay.
and protein.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. None.
Um,
One of the things I see too across the board, um, and I'm not sure. I can only assume it comes from the diet, but the false impression that the New Caledonia geckos are fruitivorous because they're really not. I mean, not as far as I know. They're they're either insectivores or they're carnivores, essentially. Um, in the original notes that were taken, now I probably should go back and read because there's probably more information out now. But the original notes that were taken, they were witnessed eating pollen, tree saps, flower heads, stuff like that. And I'm not saying that they don't eat fruit, right? I'm
Right,
just
right,
saying
right, right.
that's not for all these animals. Fruit is not the staple in the wild. The reason these fruit diets came about is because the animals naturally had such a varied diet that we couldn't take care of them. That's why we were failing in the beginning, man. We were feeding them baby food. So the diets were meant not as a food, they were meant as a dietary supplement, right? To get the vitamins and nutrient into the animal. And so now we have all these animals that eat different things. And the problem was, how do we get all these nutrients into all these guys? They all eat different things. And the answer was because when these animals were first being studied, whatever their food source was, when that became limited, they all went, their backup was the fruits, the pollens, the nectars, and stuff like that. So that was the one thing they all had in common. So that was the basis for this nutritional idea, if you will. But now it's turned into these are fruit eaters, and they're not. I mean, yeah, gargoyles are definitely not fruit eaters.
Definitely not. And probably, I'm trying to think, maybe lychees,
No.
more so than
Right.
gargoyle. No, no, no. Maybe lychees are on top of gargoyles as far as most requiring proteins
Yes.
and insects. And
Yes.
but gargoyles and lychees are so close together, and then the other ones kind of fall way down
Right.
here as far as how much protein, meats and things like that in their diet that they need.
Yeah, they all need protein. Protein is the fuel for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're. I mean, even if they're insectivores, the amount of protein, primarily insectivores, the amount of protein they're getting is still quite high. And that the diets. All right. So again, going across the whole gambit. Okay. And so here's because I ask why for everything. All right.
Yeah.
So here's one of the questions that leads in the direction that I think, in my opinion, I don't think we give any of these animals enough protein. I think we're short all the way across. Definitely in gargoyles. I think crested geckos, probably they're not. They're insectivores. They're not eating other. I think all the big geckos are opportunistic. So even an
Yes.
adult crested is going to eat another gecko if he's hungry. Maybe that's not what he's hunting for, but the opportunity is there. They're going to take it. I
Yes.
think all of these animals need more protein than we give them, and so some of my evidence toward that is gargoyle specifically. All the other new cows we've had parthenogenesis or successful parthenogenesis, even at least hatching. Okay, maybe not reproducing all the way through the life cycle, but
Yeah.
successfully hatching and going on. Gargoyles, to my knowledge, only a handful, 2 or 3 have ever lived, and most of those are not right animals. They have problems. The question is why. If Mother Nature gave them the ability to do this, it has to be a successful ability. We're just
Yeah.
not seeing it in captivity. So something clearly is missing. In some of the experiments I've done, when I've been able to give more protein to my animals, and the group that I cite for this is sexually mature animals, but they are not being bred.
Okay.
So they're fully capable. They're not ready yet, in my opinion. When these animals get more protein, they start laying parthenogenic eggs, like they're going just like an animal that's been bred. Now, granted, I did not keep these and try to incubate them just because of the success rate in the past was so terrible. But the rise in what I would call parthenogenic eggs because of protein would lead me to believe that that's probably the missing link.
Gosh, it really sounds like it has to be right there for one of the reasons. It has to be.
Well,
How
if
do
these
you
guys
feel
are eating
about?
geckos for a living, I mean, most of their diet is going to be other geckos, then their protein and calcium requirements, in my opinion, are much higher than everybody else's.
Oh, exactly, exactly. How do you feel about some of the additives that are coming out? Some of the black soldier fly, dried black, ground black soldier fly, ground mealworms, things like that that you can add to your
Sure,
diets. How
sure.
do you feel about that as opposed to feeding live animals? Or does that have I guess my question is, does that have a place, some of these additives?
I think all of that stuff has a place because everybody's, you know, everybody has a unique situation.
Yeah.
I think if you want to get to the nitty gritty though, what ultimately what's better for the animal, right? I mean that would ultimately be the question. As great as the diets are. This is one of the things that I pose all the time because I hear people, as a matter of fact, I just read a post the other day where somebody's animal, they said it wasn't eating the diet, but it was eating bugs. And several people had chimed in and said, well, stop feeding it bugs. It needs to eat the diet. And that's exactly the opposite of what I would argue that all day long. If you're gut loading, if you're just buying bugs from the pet store and you're bringing them home and throwing them in, that might be a valid argument. If you're gut loaded, you're feeding your bugs before you feed your bugs to your gecko, then that is not a valid argument whatsoever. What I see across the board is I think a lot of, and these are newer keepers. I think
Yes.
a lot of people expect them to eat a lot more than they actually eat.
Yeah.
I think that seems to be the, you know, how many times I've had somebody contact me and say, okay, my gecko isn't eating it. And okay, so how long has it been? It's been 3 weeks. Okay, not for nothing, but I can tell you, no New Caledonian gecko is going to not eat for 3 weeks and still be alive. It's not going to happen. And then so I asked for a picture of the animal, and the animal looks absolutely fine. And I'm okay. Well, here's the thing: the animal is absolutely eating. You're just not seeing it for whatever reason. You're not realizing it, or you're expecting it to eat more than it actually is. Now with the bugs, that's the other thing. Of course, it's not going to. You get the same argument going back and forth. So people that have a gecko that doesn't take bugs and they're trying to get it, well, I tried, you know, everything under the sun and it doesn't want to take the bugs. Well, more than likely, when I keep digging, those people are also keep adding the diet. If you're trying to get the animal to take the bugs and it doesn't typically, you have to stop feeding it diet because it has to be hungry.
Going back to your point about my gecko isn't eating its diet, and it should be, and now I'm concerned that it's losing weight and everything. My first question is not show me a picture of your animal. My first question is show me a picture of that food dish. Can you show me how much food you're feeding? And then they show me a picture of like my cereal, my Jethro cereal bowl that I
Yes.
use for Captain Crunch that's like this big, and
Yes.
it's like just head size,
Yeah.
just it's not a lot. And
Yeah.
then let's get a pattern, let's see if it is eating any diet, and then maybe it, keep adding a little bit of diet to see if it eats more and more. So
If
but
it's not
everybody
eating, the number one cause of not eating is low humidity, low average.
ah
All right. So it's important to understand again averages for everybody listening, right? If you want to know what your average is, take your humidity twice a day for 7 days a week, do the math on it and figure out what your average is. That's how you know what you're at. When somebody asks what's your average humidity, that's what it is. It's not what it was yesterday at noon.
great point. I'll throw in there with my experience with working with people online and seeing some of their answers back to, okay, tell me how you're keeping it. Um, One of my biggest things is people, and again, we're talking about new keepers that are concerned, greatly concerned about their animals, and that's great that they have the passion. But what I'll get most of the time is, okay, tell me how you feed your animals. Well, I take it out of its enclosure and I put it in a new enclosure. Then I tong and I take the legs off the crickets and tong feed and I put it in front and my point back to them is just leave it alone.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's more stress that you build up by taking. I think sometimes new keepers are caring too much for their animals. Just leave them alone and they'll be fine.
I think some of that comes they want to befriend. They want to earn the trust, right?
Yes.
And for some animals, hand feeding is a valid way to earn trust, right?
Yeah.
But it depends on the situation. If you this has become in the last couple of years has become one of my things at the shows because you saw my animals on the table at the shows. The number one question I get is how do you do this? How do you have 7 animals out on the table and you're not worried about them leaving or you're not worried about anything happening with the animals? Is because I've learned how to talk to them. I've learned I know that sounds crazy. I've learned
No,
how
it
to
doesn't.
teach the animals. I've learned how to teach them to trust people, um, by by watching them behave and asking questions about their behaviors, then running experiments, based on those questions. Um, with some animals, hand feeding is a good way, no doubt. With these animals, it is not a good thing, because most people don't understand how the animal is thinking and behaving, and
Yeah.
how it's taking in the world around it. Um, the same reason why I would argue that smaller enclosures are better for these guys. It is largely because of what is happening in the wild. What I see in my collection across the board would tell me that these animals in the wild are not, we think that they live in the wild, that they're running, acres and acres of land wherever they want to go. I don't think that's the case. I think provided shelter and food are consistent, they live in like a 2-foot square area. And unless they have to go out of that area, they don't do it. And I could sit here and go to evidence. This is why we have so many localities of leachianus on one island, because the animals are not moving. They stay in the same place. It's I almost guarantee, if we were allowed to go out there and really do a head-to-toe search, there's already been some people that are saying this. There's probably multiple localities of all of these geckos, right? Multiple localities of gargoyles, multiple localities of crested geckos, multiple localities of all of them, because their behavior, because of the 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 island structure, they don't wander the whole island. They're staying in relatively the same place their whole life. It's why they feel safer in these small cages. It's why you don't want to hand feed, right? So they scent mark from their hiding place to the food, and they visually understand the whole world from that point of view. All right. So
Yeah.
in my collection, I've taken an animal in a cage that's established, say on the bottom row, move him to the top shelf. He has to go through a whole new acclimation, but I don't change anything except for the position of the enclosure, because it's visual. Okay, so
Yes.
what these animals are doing, they are remembering and scent marking where the food is. So if you're hand feeding at the edge of the cage, the animal scent marks from the hide spot out to where your hand is, and then is looking at you and your hand for food, and then does that every single night. So if you are not there every single night holding the food, they don't have a tendency to go look for it somewhere else, because they're following that scent trail. So with these animals, it is not a good idea to hand feed them.
Yeah. And especially, and I want to emphasize my point is that I don't think it's a good idea to hand feed, especially in the first 2, 3, 4,
Oh,
5,
no,
6 weeks or so.
no, definitely
Get
not.
them as hands off as you possibly can, so they acclimate as quickly as possible.
Yep.
You brought up a great point there of them finding their food, and I've got to ask you this, um, Paul. Do you feel, and this is all enclosure based and everything, so it falls into that category. Do you feel that food presented at a certain location is better than another location?
I have experimented, because I've
Yeah.
seen both. I don't think it makes a difference whether
Okay.
you put it up high or you put it up low. What I would say is, wherever you choose to put it, don't move it, for the same reason I just explained about hand feeding. All right. So if
Love
you
it.
buy a gecko you say you get a gecko from, it is worth noting, right? If you buy a gecko, I think would be a very valid question to ask. Where does the previous
Good.
keeper do that? Um, the argument against this is where they feed, I would argue against that, because if they're eating fruit, they are not picking it off the trees. They're picking up the ripe stuff that's rotting, that's hit the floor. Um, and this would be my argument too against, right? So I've seen a lot of people, ask when to change the diet out. If it gets moldy, clearly toss it out. If it
Oh,
starts to
yeah.
ferment, leave it in there, because I see most of the geckos actually seem to prefer it when it ferments a little bit.
Yeah. Um, Great point. And if I'm wrong with putting it on the floor, I want to hear that. It's good to hear that you kind of have that same feeling that, the fruit's on the ground. They're going to
Hmm.
come up. They're going to lap up the juices and eat the fermenting fruit meat. So that's great to hear. For do you for gargoyles, do you feed insects?
I do. I try
Okay.
to
Well,
I try to get them to take bugs.
okay.
Not all of them do though.
What kind of insects do you feed? Do you find that some insects are not acceptable as much to gargoyles as other insects?
Well, I can't say that I've again because I'm trying to take care of lots and lots of
Yeah,
animals.
yeah, yeah.
So I typically don't cater to any one or two. I go for what everybody does the best. I do offer mealworms or superworms. Um, Again, that's hit or miss. And crickets, and those are largely the two things that the gargoyles get. A lot of them, I've tried the roaches. If I if it's animals that I teach to take roaches when they're young, a
Yeah.
lot of times they'll do it later on. The one thing that I find with because the gargoyles aren't driven to go for bugs, if the gargoyles get musked by a roach, that's it. It's over.
Oh,
They'll never
wow.
even look at it again.
I never thought about that.
My goal is to have diet available 24/7. That's not always I don't always get to accomplish that, but that's the goal. And then with the gargoyles, it's the adults, not always the younger animals. The adults will get bugs every time I'm in the cage, just because I'm in the cage. Um, but now that being said, right, so these are my adult breeders. There's typically 5 adults in each enclosure. They're lucky if I throw 8, 10 crickets in there. So each one of them's only going to get one or two. They're not sitting there eating a dozen crickets.
And I know it's very different from other people, but how do you raise up? Tell us about your baby enclosures, if you would, Paul.
Baby enclosures are basically the same. I mean, my baby enclosures are small. Um, I start them out in 5 cup enclosures.
Okay.
Not even 6 quart. I did 6 quart in the very beginning. I've told this story, so some people that have listened to me a couple of times have probably heard this, but I used to start them out in 6 quart tubs, and it would take a week or so for them to do gecko things, right? Start behaving like a gargoyle for the most part. Um, this is also the time that I was playing with incubation. I was trying to try to understand sex determination, and I was incubating. I've incubated everything from 65
Ah,
to almost 90 to 87, 88 degrees.
wow.
So this was a high temperature incubation, and I had like 20 babies hatched that I wasn't expecting them to hatch that quick. I didn't have enclosures for them, so I raided the kitchen cabinets for, plastic enclosures, and I put all these babies in the enclosure and I feed them, which is also not something I typically do the first night. I just offer water. I usually don't offer food, but at this time I was offering food, and I went back the next day, and not every single one of these babies had eaten so much that it couldn't lay flat. Its belly was round and distended. And I was like, what the heck?
Yeah.
Something, there's something here. So I started playing with it. And lo and behold, again, this is one of the reasons I preach smaller is better. I now start off all of my babies in those 5 cup containers. Cresteds and Chihuahua get moved on quite a bit quicker and Lychees get moved out quite quickly. More quickly than the gargoyles, but yeah, the difference is it's a night and day difference. Um,
Any thoughts? Any thoughts why that's so
I,
different?
I think it's a couple theories. I think it's safety. You know, again, when you go back to what these animals are going through in the wild, geckos the largest biomass on New Caledonia. Almost all the big geckos are eating other geckos to some degree. So when you first come out of the egg, you are literally on the menu for everything on the island. And we're only talking geckos. Forget, anything else that, I know there's birds of prey on the island. There's a predatory crow. In fact, I think that's responsible for crested geckos being kind of the way they are. Um, Tangent.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So these animals they want to hide more than anything. They want to hide, and again, because of how they're understanding the environment both visually and chemically, the visual aesthetics and the size of open space. Right, because open space is a threat. So all of those things make a difference. The biggest difference with these smaller enclosures, I can tell you, And you can, anybody who's watching, contact anybody who's ever met me at a show, and they'll back this up. When you come to my tables, every single one of my cresteds has a tail on it. I can take out, I have cresteds on my table that people can come up and pick up and hold with their
I can
tail.
attest.
Perfect strangers.
Yep.
I can take out any one of my babies and hand them over to a perfect stranger, and they might be nervous, but they're not going to freak out. And I totally give that to these smaller enclosures. They're I'll use the example of a crested only because of the way that it thinks. And a fear crested coming out of the egg is a fear-based thinker.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so I put them in this really small enclosure, and I think two things are happening. The really small enclosure helps them feel safe. All right. So if we put their mentality basically boil it down to positive and negative. As long as they're in a positive frame of mind, then handling, I don't become a threat. If they're in a negative frame of mind and I'm touching them, then I'm a threat. So the whole idea is to keep them in that positive frame of mind to begin with before I interact with them. So these smaller enclosures, I feel help them feel safe. There's less scent marking, so there's less for them to understand and remember. And the tighter, cluttered, if you will, enclosed space just helps them feel safer. And then because it's such a small enclosure and because it's paper products, I have to clean that cage almost every single day. All right. So if not every other day. So you
Yeah.
add on top of this, they feel safe to begin with. And then I am touching them and holding them every day, every other day. So I think those two things combined are really, what I attribute it to now is I truly believe I'm teaching the animal how to think in a much more confident manner than rather look at everything as a threat, as being fear based.
I agree so much, Paul. I cannot tell you. It's hard to see. Again, I'm not trying to pick on Facebook. That's not my intent here. But to see on Facebook, well, you need a smaller enclosure because they can't find the food, just drives me
That's not
insane.
what it is.
Um, in nature, they're finding food. They're going out, but big things eat little things. They're little things. That's their number one job. My number one job is to stay alive.
Mhm.
And number two is to eat. Number three is to poop. But my number one job is to stay alive. So if it's a choice between feeding and going, all the way across this 55-gallon enclosure to find that food, I'm probably going to just stay right here because there's big things out there. I love the fact that you're talking about smaller enclosures because I have the same exact thought. Put it right there in front of them, let them eat, and make them feel as secure
Mhm.
as we as keepers can make them feel secure. Give them the necessary and the food right there, and they grow quick and like you said, you expounded on that in saying that they feel more comfortable and
Mhm.
they don't feel threatened.
Right.
What a great point. Thank you. Anything about their enclosures? Temperature. How often do you mist? How do you mist? Things like that with the babies.
Um, because I have the building, I have the AC set at basically a certain temperature. I have the humidifier running, and it does its thing. There's no, I mean, I can't control everything to perfection. But fortunately here, the outside weather plays a role, so the days that it's hotter, it is warmer in my building. The days that it's colder, it gets colder, and so on. So the daily changes here influence what I get in my building. I don't do any more in manipulation than what the machines are set at. When it comes to feeding, the same schedule. I try not to mist, but again, because I am using paper products, the inside of those containers can dry out quicker than the air in the building. So typically, when I'm going through, I give a light mist.
Okay. Okay. Their decor. Are you using the egg cartons?
Yeah, again, it's all paper products, egg cartons, paper towel or newspaper. For food dishes, for all the babies, I use all the disposable souffle cups.
Okay. Okay.
And I found in the beginning in using these, to touch on your point before about the animals walking in the food dish. Um, I switched. This was something I did years and years ago because that is anybody who keeps a number of these animals, that is an absolute nightmare. Um, went from going from dishes with a wide mouth to dishes with a very narrow mouth, but they're deeper. So there's less room. You know, the gecko has to dig a little bit more, but there's less room for them to step in it and track it all over the place.
Interesting.
So those are all I think they're the half ounce souffle cups.
Okay.
So for babies, I just use the egg crates, and then the egg crates essentially hold the souffle cups in place. For the adults, I make holders, and the souffle cups are on the floor.
Did I miss it? What are you keeping your babies at as far as temperature?
It's the same as the whole building.
Okay.
This time of year during the day, I'm probably like anywhere from 77 to 80 this time of day or this time of year. The winter time, my average is probably maybe low 70s, 74. And at nighttime, it probably gets into the 60s, high 60s.
Do you have anything specific you do with breeding? Do you build up the breeding process? Do you brumate? Do you separate? Do you feed more? Do you do anything to get to that point where, okay, here we go. We're day one of breeding for 2025.
Not really. I
Okay.
don't. I cater to I do cater to the animals to some, I guess, to some degree.
Yeah.
What I see collection wide is there does seem to be a food preference based on the season. Again, okay, so I'm going to go back to gargoyles, primarily gargoyles
Yeah.
here. In the wintertime, so like in October, starting November, December, the animals do seem to prefer the diets. And then come the end of December, January, and again, this is not every animal, just my collection as a whole. The animals start to seem to crave the live food, the protein. And I think that makes sense because in the wild, again, that follows the food, the what we thought was happening, between what they normally eat and then their backup food. I kind of see the same thing in my collection, and so I roll with that. I don't cater to any of the animals. If somebody doesn't eat this week, I don't get upset. They don't eat. I mean, if they don't eat 1 week, or oftentimes it's just that they don't eat as much. It's not that they don't eat.
Yes.
And if they eat if they're going for bugs, my argument, I love the diets. Without the diets, these animals would be very difficult to keep. The diets make them very simple.
Yeah. Yes.
But my argument when it comes to bug versus diet, if you are gut loading your bugs and you're feeding them good food and you're dusting them with calcium and D3, I think the bugs are a better food source. Even if the diet and the bug were nutritionally equal, just say, for example, I think the animals could pull more of the available nutrition out of the natural source than it can the processed source. So yeah, if your animals are taking bugs, I say don't cut that back. Let them, and the protein, they need the protein.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that the more we're seeing these bigger breeders, especially crested gecko breeders, proving out that point where you're feeding your animals more bugs, more bugs rather than the diets consistently, we're seeing bigger and quicker to size animals. Is that a
Sure.
good thing or a bad thing? I don't
Sure.
know. It's just, I think it's proving out a point that, and again, I'm exactly like you, and especially since we're both selling animals to people that want one pet or people that are breeding their animals. So we want to be factual, but we also want to be realistic with this information that we're giving them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big believer in the diets as well, but I am also a big believer in especially younger animals feeding more and more insects. The more insects we can feed. So do you have a natural decrease in temperatures in your facility in the wintertime
Yeah.
and then an increase? Do you think that stimulates, or do you think that the cooler temperatures give the animals a little bit of a rest?
Honestly,
Or
I don't
are
think temperature
they
has
just
much to
breeding all through the year?
I don't think they do. Some animals breed throughout the year.
Okay.
Not all of them,
Okay.
but some of them do. I personally, and this isn't just these guys. I would argue this point with reptiles across the board. I don't think temperature is as big a deal as we give it credit for. I don't think temperature is the main influence. Not at all. I think the two influences that animals are being cued on, breeding season, cycles, all this stuff, are light cycle and barometric pressure. Because both of those things are responsible for temperature, humidity, everything else. Those are the two driving factors for all other weather patterns. So that's, in my opinion, those are the two factors that the animals are really cued into, not temperature. Temperature regulates um, I'm having a brain fart here.
Oh,
Metabolism.
metabolism.
Yeah,
Yes.
metabolism. But it doesn't. I don't think it has a direct influence on the cycles of the body.
Okay.
I think probably to go deeper into that, because that does depend on the species for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
because some species require a dormant or a certain temperature in order to reproduce. Other species do not. But going back to the drivers, all right. So here's the example where I first started coming up with this idea was largely because of the bearded dragons, sun lovers. All right. So light,
Yeah.
super important for these guys. This is when I was in New Jersey. There was a period of time where I kept them in my basement. And I'm sure my basement was maybe something, your basement's probably something similar, because they're northeast basements. I had 3 windows in the basement that were like 12 by 12. And I covered those up because I didn't want people just being able to walk up to the house and be able to see my collection downstairs. All right.
Yes.
So these windows, for the most part, were covered up. But there was always that little splinter of light that comes around the edge. And so after the first 2 or 3 seasons of what really got me into this is because if you've kept, you did keep dragons, didn't you? I think you had dragons before.
I did.
Yeah,
We
you
did.
did dragons. All right.
Yep.
So they're seasonal. All right. And so back then the problem is you go for part of the year and there's no babies. And then all of a sudden everybody and their mother has babies and you're competing with everybody.
Yes.
Right. So the idea that I thought, was if I divide my collection, and this was also to make the work a little easier for me. If I divide the collection in half and I can control the cycle for half of it, right, I can put them in brumation while the other half is producing and then swap them out. It didn't work. It didn't work at all. And trying to understand why, my idea was because the animals, because they're sun lovers, no matter what lighting that I put on them in the enclosure, they always cued on to the natural light because we can't reproduce that in any way, shape, or form. So even that little sliver of light around the windows, that's what they were cueing on to. When the sun would come up and I'd go downstairs, regardless of whether my lights were on or not, the dragons would be up. When the sun would go down, the dragons were wanting to go to sleep. So I stopped trying to manipulate the light cycle, and I started matching my light cycle to whatever it was outside. When I started keeping more geckos, this question came about, right? So what is the driving force? I put geckos in a closet. They could not see any light whatsoever. Their cycles matched the cycles of everything else that could see light. All right. So clearly light is not the driver. What is it that they're getting? What information are they getting in this closet that is still putting them on the same cycle? And, barometric pressure, boas, right? If I know you kept boas before, bred boas.
I've not kept snakes, but
No.
obviously talked to a lot of people that do.
A lot of live bearing boas, they give birth when it's raining, right? How do they know that? Or right before a rain, they do it when it's low pressure. All right. So the low pressure, again, is what dictates all these other cycles that we're talking about, whether it's rain or temperature. It's either a high pressure or a low system that dictates either one of those. So again, I come back to that's the cue. So if you're matching your lights, like say if you're a New Caledonia keeper and you're going online and you're trying to mimic New Caledonia weather at your home, here in Chicago or wherever, I think you're totally messing up your animals because the cycles are completely opposite each other and they know that.
For breeding gargoyles, do you do anything different? Do you have a hide box in your enclosures? Do you let them just lay? This is a loaded question because I think I know exactly the answer, but do you do anything for them for breeding purposes?
Yeah, because I use paper on the bottom. Yeah, I use nesting boxes, and
What do
that
you keep? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
vermiculite. I use
Okay,
mostly vermiculite. I mean, it's different across the board. Some of them have some soil in them. Some of them have some perlite, but vermiculite is basically what I use.
cool. Um, about how many, through your experience, how many eggs are you getting a year from your gargoyles? And I know it varies, but just kind of an average.
When I'm doing my numbers, like trying to predict, I figure, or even better, when I'm valuing my animals, because what they produce, in my
Good point.
opinion, a female is value is equivalent to the value of the offspring she produces in a year for me as a
Yes.
breeder.
Yes. Yep.
So usually when I figure that out, I average 10 babies for gargoyles. 10 babies a season is the number I use.
Perfect. Perfect. I do the same thing. I have a budget. I'm a geek. I'm a spreadsheet geek. So I have to do okay, this one is worth 10 eggs and I'm going to hold back one of them. So I do the same thing and everything's based off of 10. Perfect. Um, are you checking every single week? How often are you checking for eggs?
How often do I check and how often would I like to check are two completely different things. Yeah, during the season, I would like to be checking every couple of days.
Yeah,
If I could, that's not possible. So once, um, usually twice a week, but definitely at least once. Yeah.
that's pretty much me too. Do you have any thoughts on the position of this is kind of a random question, but it's kind of not. Do you have any thoughts on the position of the egg when you collect them as compared to, okay, I'm going to keep it in the same position and I'm going to put it in the incubation box and I'm going to put a mark on it so that if it flips over, I can
Yeah, for timing.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, when I was on top of it and I could go through everything every day or so, um, the way that I was taught, um, I think this actually came from Bob Mayu, if I remember correctly. Once the egg is laid, you've got 24 hours before the embryo attaches. So
okay.
if you collect the egg within 24 hours, orientation doesn't seem to matter quite so much. But after that 24-hour period, it's got to stay where it's at. Now, me, what do I do in practice? It doesn't. I keep it exactly. I don't candle the eggs. I don't touch them. I don't handle them, except for when I'm collecting them and putting them into the incubation container, and that's it. I don't mess with them after that.
Done deal. I'm exactly the same way, and I've tried to go over to I use the bead boxes for incubation. Just again, this is your show. I apologize, but I'll put one egg per slot in a bead box so that when it's uh, when the second egg hatches out, it doesn't bother the first egg or whatever. Orientation, I do exactly the same thing. I wish somebody would prove this out because it's kind of a common knowledge that you don't turn them after a certain period of time, but who knows when that period of time is. I just try to be careful. I'll be very honest.
Yeah,
So I'm digging through and I'm trying to collect within, you know, once a week at least, and I'm digging through. And if I hit an egg, there's an egg. I'll
mhm,
stop and I'll slow down and I'll try to keep everything the
mhm.
same. So
I think that's probably it. Probably depends on the species. You know,
yeah,
specifically if you want to get down to the nitty, like exactly when, how long do you have, in all honesty, all of that probably depends on the species we're talking about,
that's a
because
good point.
they're not all the same. They don't all do the same thing. um I
Have
mean,
different requirements for movement. Like for my period or Picta, I literally juggle them in air
exactly.
because they don't care. You can have 1,000.
The way I've always kind of done it, the hard shelled geckos or hard
Yeah,
shelled eggs, orientation doesn't seem to be that important. The softer shell species, yes, it does. Whether
interesting.
whether
Very
that's the
interesting.
reality or not, that's how I treat them.
It's just a habit, a practice that we've all
Right.
gotten into, and that's okay. Tell me about incubation. How do so you pull your eggs. Tell me about the incubation container. Do you put put them in an incubator? Do you try to keep them at a certain temperature?
I've done all of the above at some point or
Good.
other. Now what do? I just keep them on a shelf in the animal room. Basically the same containers that we sell the animals in, or you might get, bugs in, or I don't know, what are they, the 16 ounce, so they're like 5 inches tall.
Okay.
So I'd fill up one of those with the substrate. I typically use either Paralite or Hatchlight. Get it to the right moisture, pop one hole in the top lid, and I put 4 clutches in each one of those. The downside to that is if I try not to, when I'm collecting eggs, I'm trying to hold. I have like several containers out at one time, so the idea being I don't want to put 4 clutches in one container and they all hatch at the same time. There's sometimes I go away and I come back and there's a couple hatch and then I don't know where they came from. So that is a downside to that. But usually I catch them, and overall it's not too much of a problem.
Well, the opposite to that is what I do with the bead boxes in one individual in every single compartment, and I have 4,683 bead boxes during a season. It becomes, I'm exaggerating, obviously,
No,
but it becomes a matter of, oh my gosh, where am I going to put another flippin' bead box here in
right.
the facility?
And that's a lot of stuff to go through and check.
It's more management. Yeah,
By keeping them in those little, what the heck are they called? The little containers we're using. I can stack them up. Yeah, the deli cups. I can stack them up on the shelf, and so all of my, I do tubs for everything. All of my shelves I made them all. They're all out of wood, largely because I needed to fit my space, not the other way around.
Yes.
Just so I can maximize space. All my tubs are lidded. So I don't have a cart that I go around the room in. My room is pretty tight. I go and unload, 5 or 6 tubs and then bring them over to a work area and swap them out and then go back.
Okay.
It does take a little more, I guess it does take a little more effort for walking around and stuff, but my building's a little tight. I don't think I could, all my, you ever gone to the library and
Yes.
the book saving shelves that they have that roll, they slide back and forth. All my adult racks, that's basically what they do.
That's
So
what I want to do. That's what I've
just
had
enough
that
room to
dream for
walk in there.
years.
Yeah.
Nice. Very nice. I have rolling racks as well, but I'm always shoving those rolling racks around the room, and it's frustrating, but it is what it is. That's that's the only option we have. Um, do you open occasionally each container? Do you add moisture? Tell us
No,
about how you manage them.
no, no, just because of time and the number of animals I have. Um, I mean, unless I'm going to take pictures or something like that, if I grab an enclosure, I pull it down for maintenance of any kind. It's all maintenance. It's not just a spray or not just putting food in there. It's the whole shebang. If it needs to be cleaned, it needs to be cleaned. Everything that needs to be changed needs to be changed. Yeah, try to do as much as I can for every time I have hands on the enclosure.
Perfect. Perfect. And obviously that's a great idea from time management. Um, you have babies hatch out. Do you keep 2 together in those
No,
smaller containers, one at a time?
always one at a time. Again,
Perfect.
going back to the same thing I expressed before. You put 2 animals together. I don't care how old they are. I don't care what they are. There's competition for resource.
Yep.
If they're an animal that is on the menu for something, so there's a fear base in that animal whatsoever. Then, in my opinion, you put another animal with it. Then that animal it doesn't know the difference between the predator and another gecko, and so. Particularly with cresteds, I think that's it. Gargoyles, not such a big deal. Gargoyles, I wouldn't put them together because they'd hurt each other.
Ever. Yeah.
Yeah,
Good point.
physically,
Really, really good
they'd hurt
point.
each other. Cresteds, I think they hurt each other mentally.
Yeah. We'll keep ours together for about, like I said before, about 4 or 5 weeks at the very most. If I miss if I've got 6 months, I hate even to say this, 6 months, I'm sorry, 6 weeks. But if I have two in the same hatch, same lay, growing out about 6 weeks, I'll start seeing a size difference, and
Sure,
that's
certainly.
never ever good.
Yeah,
So we'll try to keep them together as low time frame as we possibly can. Gargoyles, no, we never do anymore. So I did that. I did that years ago. Oh, everybody's wrong. They can't be eating their tails. The siblings can't always eat their tails. And I kept probably about 20 groups together. And sure enough, after about 5 weeks, I
sure,
had one that had a tail, one that didn't have a tail.
sure. All right, so
Guaranteed.
okay, I got a little story for you. I do morning geckos. All right, so originally I bought them as feeders for the gargoyles, and not something that I'm going to try to maintain the animals on. It was the idea is more just for animals that need it for whatever occasion it is.
Yeah, yeah.
So the very first morning gecko enclosure was a little Exoterra Nano that was right next to my workstation. So as I'm working, I could sit there and watch them doing their thing. And I typically get up pretty early in the morning. I usually start at like 4 or 5 in the morning, and I go out and I don't turn the lights on, so I do everything with a little headlight.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I'm cleaning brand new babies. Okay, so in my hand I have a gargoyle that just hatched the night before. All right, so this is a brand new baby, and for whatever reason I just happened to look up at the morning gecko enclosure, and there's a brand new baby morning gecko sticking out of the lower vent on the Exoterra, right? So that they
Okay.
can get
Oh,
through those vents. And so I reach over and I grab it real quick, and now so I've got this 1 day, 24-hour-old gargoyle in my hand, and a baby morning gecko. With the gargoyles, typically I don't try to offer them the protein crickets or anything like that until they're like 3 months, because in my experience they refuse. And I'm just like, what the heck? Let me see what happens. Now the gargoyle gecko, from my perspective, the gargoyle gecko was facing to my left. Okay, his
okay.
head was to my left. The morning gecko was on my right. I had them. The gargoyle was sitting on a paper towel in front of me, and I put the morning gecko down behind him. Dude, I almost fell over because this gargoyle whipped around and swallowed up that morning gecko with such a quickness and a ferocity that I was left stunned, because
Wow.
this was a brand new animal, and they never showed interest in that. I mean, I never tried gecko, but this is telling. I mean, so right out of the egg, the instinct to go for another gecko is extremely strong. But that gives you an idea as to probably what they're really doing in the wild. And
Did
again,
that
this goes
change your
back.
care at all? Did that change the way that you
Well,
did you go to feeding more often or earlier in their life?
no, because that feeding response is strictly on with another gecko. And
Yeah, good
I can
point.
produce a lot of morning geckos, but I can't produce enough to raise my babies.
No, no. Um, yeah, very interesting. So we don't get. I wait 2 weeks to about 2 weeks to start feeding live foods, but I'll start with small mealworms first, and I get a really good. I get an almost an immediate with feeding response with the crusteds, and the gargoyles just kind of take a little bit to develop that feeding response. And I don't feel like gargoyles ever really take to mealworms like they do other foods.
That's not what they're
Dubias,
programmed for.
yeah, yeah, I think you're right.
They're programmed
Dubias,
for geckos.
yeah, they'll take a gargoyle. Gargoyles will take a dubia that running at them, and they'll just sit there and wait, and then they'll scarf it up pretty well. But a mealworm that's kind of wiggling and jiggling in front of them is like, what? No, I don't want this.
Yeah.
Um, occasionally, so that's kind of interesting. That especially that live other gecko, and they just jump. And morning geckos are super fast too. It's pretty cool that it grabbed it before the morning gecko could get away.
Okay, so here's something I
Wow,
just learned actually about a month ago. Morning geckos are native to New Caledonia.
really?
The
So I wouldn't even have known their locale. I guess I'd never looked it up. So
Yeah, well, because they're from the Southeast Asia area,
okay,
right?
that's what I
So
thought. But
that includes New Caledonia, and there are arguments that they are not introduced, that they are part of the natural population, the natural spread.
Interesting.
Which, all right, so then you go to look at the bovia and you look at some of the. This would explain why the gargoyles like that. I mean, the bovia are in the notations that I'm aware of, where the gargoyles are being tracked hunting. They're hunting bovia, and
That
bovia and
100%
mourning
makes
geckos,
sense.
same thing.
Wow. Wow. And I would think that morning geckos obviously reproduce faster, so it probably is they're going to find more of them than
Probably,
bovias.
and they're
Wow.
smaller. Well,
Yeah.
the bovia are pretty small as babies too. I mean, they would make a
Yeah.
suitable food source for baby gargs.
Yeah. Interesting. I need to start uh, growing out morning geckos, like mass producing them. That's what I need to do.
Speaking of this, right? So that feeding response, Leachianus, you offer a quail or a crested gecko to a Leachianus, you get exactly the same thing. So I would maintain that in the wild, that Leachiana, I think Leachianus and gargoyles are doing the same job essentially. They're just doing it in different departments, if you will. But yeah,
That's a great insight because in the back of my mind, I have thought this forever that lychees, gargoyles are right there together, and then everything else kind of falls
yeah.
in other categories.
I
Interesting.
think. All right. So again, I'm always asking why and how. All right. So New Caledonia is all the animals are endemic to New Caledonia, and New Caledonia's got all these different species of gecko. So how does that happen? Right. I mean, if all these geckos, all the bigger geckos, right? So the lychees, the seras, the chihuahua, all these animals are endemic to New Cal. I mean, although they've done genetic testing and they are not the same, that doesn't exclude the idea that they could all have a common ancestor, which I think is probably highly likely. Gargoyles and Leachianus are clearly, they are still in the same family. Genetically, they are still related. I've seen some really big gargoyles, and in my time taking care of the gargoyles since we first started, average adult size in the beginning was like 45 grams. And now people are saying don't breed it unless it's 65 grams. So two things, we're taking care of them better, or are they just getting bigger because we're selectively breeding for bigger animals, right?
Or we're giving them different and more. Some people are giving them more food
More
than they're
nutrition,
used to in the wild,
right?
more nutrition.
Right. I
This
think
is a
I
Go
wouldn't be
ahead.
surprised if one day we get gargoyles that could be as big as like some of the smaller lychees. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that there is a very good chance we're going to see some really big animals coming up, which is a great segment or segue to let's talk about let's talk about traits. Let's talk about traits and morphs. Do you feel, and I don't know if this is proven or not, but do you feel there are morphs in the gargoyle community in what we're seeing in gargoyles right now?
By definition, yeah, yes.
Excuse me.
I think with the reptile community's definitions don't don't always line up with
Scientific.
yeah, yes.
Yeah.
So a morph, I guess, if you want to get down to the nitty gritty, a morph is a phenotype of whatever it looks like. I mean, that's a morph. But we use that in ball pythons, we use that in bearded dragons, we use that in a lot of
Leopard
other geckos,
geckos.
right?
Yep, yep.
But unfortunately for the New Cal stuff, genetics do not work the same way they do for those other animals. So I don't think that word morph can be used in the same way. If it's a morph, it has to be something that can be reproduced
Yeah.
with intention.
Yes. Yes. 100%. You know, how as a gargoyle community should we be addressing this? Maybe we just simply address it as this is a blotched, this is a striped, this is yellow, this is orange, this is white, this is black.
I, I
Don't
think you
know.
should call it the way you see it for the most part.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
tend to
mean,
agree,
with these
Paul.
guys, if you were, when people ask me in the public, morph on these, I only recognize two morphs: striped and reticulated. Right now,
Me too.
everything else is a version of one of those two things.
So what you're saying, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but this is my thought. is we're kind of back to the super hypotangerine carrot-tail leopard geckos where everything is line bred. That's a really nice carrot-tail. Oh my gosh. Well, it's taken a long time to, well, isn't it genetics? Well, it's genetics, obviously, but it's not a morph. It's just a better. It's a better. It looks
Gene
better
stacking.
because, yes, gene stacking. I've worked with this for a long, long time, and this is what I'm trying to get to. This is my vision. So gargoyles, I want a better red. I want more red. Or I want very distinctive, whatever it is.
Hmm.
We work toward, I think as a community, we work toward that, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
And we just produce better and better.
yeah. In the beginning. You put two. I mean, let's say you got two of the best super blotches that you can find. If they came out of the wild, you breed those two together, you get almost zero super blotches in the beginning. You know, you might get one or two
Yeah,
for every
yeah.
50 or 60 animals, but you go through a lot of babies before you get what mom and dad look like. And so over the years, right? I mean, in gargoyles, the same thing has pretty much been popular since the beginning. Red stripes. That's the number one across the board. And because most people breed for red stripes, in my opinion, gargoyles in the U.S. tend to genetically favor red stripes, even if they
Yes.
don't look that way.
When I started keeping gargoyles, it's got to be 20 years ago. That was it.
Hmm.
I want to make the best red stripe I possibly
Hmm.
can get. And um, you know, it would be like, oh, there's a RhacHouse. Boy, someday I'm gonna have one just like RhacHouse has a whole page of them. So that was my goal to try to, do better, do better with the reds. Um, but it's hard because it's not just like you said. I'm saying the same thing
They
that you
don't
just
breed
said.
true.
It's not consistent. It's
Right.
not predictable. It's not something that you can say, okay, if I breed this really nice red one, I'm going to get 50-50. It's just not.
Right.
Um, how do you feel about, I know how I feel about your lines, but how do you feel about your lines and where do you want to take your lines, which are already top of the line in the hobby, I feel. Where do you want to take your lines in the future?
That's a good question. Um, for many of my lines, it's really just I mean, the continuation will never. So the super blotches, the very first blotches that I ever saw would now today would be just considered a regular run of the mill blotch. Um, the first time I bred them together and I got an animal that had more blotching on it than both of the parents, my head started reeling, going, "Wow, what if I could get this color to go over the entire animal?" Um, I've got some animals that are pretty close, but I can't say that I've ever got the entire animal. Um, after doing it for a couple of years, we started to realize too that the head and the face were two places that Mother Nature really didn't want that color to begin with, and so that has been a goal, and now it's a goal for many breeders is to get that color. Um, as much as I'm still doing the same thing, um, there's a part of me that doesn't really like that so much anymore. The stripes. Okay, so one of the things
Okay.
I fell in love with the gargoyles in the beginning was because no two were alike.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't matter, right? Every single one was different. Um, when we achieved the perfect stripes, the breeders achieved perfect stripes in breeding. To me, that took some of the value away from those animals. It was a great achievement and something that we tried to do for many years. But once we got there, to me, all the animals started looking the same, with the exception of whatever hue they are. But the pattern itself was relatively the same across the board. It's one of the reasons why I prefer the reticulation, because even still, if you got an animal that's 80% covered, it is completely different from another reticulation that is 80% covered. But if we keep going in that direction, I could see a day where those retics are 100% covered, and then they look like just every other one. Um,
That's a funny concept because a fully covered gargoyle, it's just like every other one. But
well, I
I,
mean,
honest to
most people
goodness,
are
your
looking for
point.
something that's a little different, right?
Yes, yes, yes. I 1,000% understand your point. And in my world, years and years ago, I used to do a lot of leopard geckos. I don't do as many anymore, but to have that perfect carrot-tail, oh my gosh. You mean it's 100% covered? Oh my gosh. Oh, Billy has one too, and then so does Susie. And then your expectation is always, it's not, oh my gosh, I'm going to get to this point. It's, well, it has to have. For me to be breeding
True.
this animal, it has to have this. It's an expectation. Um, but I can't see a fully covered red gargoyle gecko. That would be so cool. Um, how about yellows and oranges and whites and blacks? How do you feel about them?
They're all awesome.
Yeah.
I black and whites. I think I've got a pretty nice line of black and whites. I got very lucky early on, and I found animals that were, black and white label. It goes across the board. I see a lot of animals labeled black and white that I wouldn't personally call black and white. But yeah, the black and whites are probably the hardest ones to produce. Nice black and whites, probably the hardest to produce. Um, Yellows and oranges were difficult to reproduce consistently for many years. Um, Yellow, I think I have a line that controls the yellow, so yellow is no longer something that I have difficulty reproducing on its own. Orange still is a little elusive. I mean, I can make it,
Yeah.
but it I can't make it as predictable as the other colors.
Still a little bit random. Oh my gosh, I just produced an orange.
Well,
Um,
you know what? I think there's a I what I believe is happening in gargoyles. I think color does not appear to be easily manipulated individually, like say in the Pictus or a lot of the other animals that we do. I tend to think I see the color in gargoyles as being one set of genetics, pattern color. Okay, it's one set of genetics being expressed to different degrees. So the idea would be red would be 100% and white would be 0%, yellow is 25%, orange would be 50%. Now going back to how the genetics work, and because red was the primary color that everybody was breeding for many years, red is the ultimate expression of that color, and that's what the vast majority of animals genetically tend to want to go for. So going backwards, I find is the real difficulty. Um, yeah, the yellows, the isolated yellows that I have, I I could never make it. In the beginning, I was getting the most beautiful yellow adults that I could find, and they never made yellow babies, never. So out of my black and whites, there was still variability. So I started keeping the animals that were not as crispy white and black. They had a little bit more yellow, more sandy appearance, and then kind of use those as the basis to control the yellow, and that actually did work. And I tried to do the same process to isolate orange. So far, though, that has not worked quite the same way. It could be animals, it could be genetics, but I don't know.
I'll say it just like we said it a couple of minutes ago, but that's what keeps it fun. Because if we could produce 100% carrot tail every single time,
It wouldn't be
it just
fun.
it
It wouldn't be
loses
a challenge.
that thrill. It wouldn't be a challenge. I was just going to say, I've got to share this with our viewers. I was just going to say that I've been dealing with the reds and for so long. For me, it's got to be color. It's got to be red. It's got to be orange. For crustaceans, for gargoyles. But I stopped by this table recently that had a black and white gargoyle,
Mm.
and for a second, it slipped my mind on whose table it was. And it's like, oh yeah, I remember stopping by somebody's table that had a black and white gargoyle, and it took me 3 steps backwards. Like, why don't I work with black and white gargoyles anymore? Because this animal is so distinctive and so clean. I can't describe it any other way. The blacks are black, the whites are whites, and then it's like my old time self realized that, oh, that table was Paul's. That was
Oh,
at
that
that
was.
recent Tinley show. You had a beautiful black and white gargoyle, and it literally, ooh, Paul's reds. Yeah, I kind of expect that. He's got the best reds around, and oh my gosh, look at that black and white animal. That is so cool. And again, it took me back a little bit. Like I need to be working with black and whites now again a little bit.
They are for the same reason. They are. I mean, until you get a line that is got some history in black and white, to get just again. Let me make sure I make clear what my goal is for black and white.
Yes, yes.
I want a base color that is paper white. I want pattern that is jet black, and I don't want to see any other colors on the animal. I don't want to see yellow. I don't want to see orange. I don't want to see any of those colors. That's to me, that's the perfect black and white, and those are hard to make. They are.
Hard. That animal, I will say, was very distinctive. The blacks were black. I can't remember the white. Maybe I can't remember because the black was so vividly black and so defined that that was such a contrast that the
Mhm.
black just stood out. It was just like somebody painted black and brought it, up a couple of levels. It was so cool of an animal to
Wait,
see.
wait to see what we can do in a couple years with. All right, so I have a line where I'm trying to make melanistic animals, black
Oh,
animals, and for last year was the first year. I've had the project going for many years. Last year was the first year that I feel like I can sell the animals now as melanistic babies. They're almost all of them are coming out super dark, and staying that way through adulthood. And so I was talking to a another breeder not too long ago, and she's working with the black and whites, and she's wanting to make that contrast that you were talking about. Increase the pattern to make that contrast stronger. And in our conversation, it hit me because I never thought of it in that in that direction. And so now I'm also gonna I started a project for the same thing, working on concentrating on the pattern itself. I don't care if it's retic, if it's striped. I don't care if there's colors in it, whatever. I just want the thickest, darkest pattern animals I can find. And now if I add those, I'm thinking of for my melanistic line. If I can get somewhere with that and then add that into animals where I'm making them dark already, then that should like really rocket that project into a whole nother level, I'm kind of thinking. So we'll see.
and again, the wild card is that we don't know if this is trait, if it's gene stacking. We don't know if it's gene stacking or if there's something back there. Ryan McVeigh showed me a melanistic Chihuahua recently,
Mhm.
and I will swear up and down that this is not a regular Chihuahua. There's no line breeding whatsoever. This is a distinctively different animal. It has to be genetic. So we just don't know that with gargoyles yet, right?
Well, okay. The only because the genetics work differently for these species,
Yeah.
I would hesitate to make that kind of label on a Chihuahua, even if it's dark,
Okay. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because all right, so when we're talking stuff like that, hypomelanism,
Yep.
melanistic, both of those terms, hypomelanism is less than normal. Melanistic is defined as more than normal. All right, so the variable that we have with these guys is what's normal, because there really isn't a normal, because there are some animals that are much lighter, and then there are some animals that are much darker. On top of being labeled melanistic, again, we go back to, in my opinion, going back to the definition of morph, it has to be something that can be reproduced with predictability. Um, my black project with the gargoyles, the whole reason that started, all right, this is before I started RhacHouse. I had a group of gargoyles that I already had for a couple of years, and they were all, I think, two reticulated and a striped. No big deal, nothing fancy whatsoever. But I had them for many years already. They they had a very high tendency to reproduce the same type of look in the babies. And so one year, two clutches hatched. Only three of them made it out, but all three of these babies were black. They were black out of the egg, and they stayed black to adulthood. So here I am thinking, holy cow, I've got this group that's produced probably 100 babies, and I've never seen
Nailed it.
anything like this before. And now I get 3 of them that are like this, that are completely different, and they are jet black all the way to adulthood. It was 2 boys and a girl. And so I don't breed them till 3 years. I raise them up 3 years. The first boy's ready. I put him in. This was actually one of the first groups that I did one-on-one. I don't usually do one-on-one. And I go to check on him about 15 minutes later, and he's dead. Total heartbreak. All right. But
Oh my
I've got
God.
another one, and I've got a female. So not the end of the world. When I go to
Yeah,
put the
but you're
male,
shaking in your boots thinking about introducing them. I'll
absolutely. I'm
guarantee that.
terrified. I'm terrified.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, because, here we could call this 3 years into this project now, and I just got booted right off the bat.
In
And
an
so
hour's time. Done.
not even an hour. So literally it was minutes. I mean, as soon as the mail
Oh.
went up to her, I'm sure she whipped around, and, they started arguing, and that was it. So the second male, I go to pair the second male. I'm scared. Right. So I put him in, I go to check on him in 5 minutes. He's prolapsed. I take him out, thinking, okay, maybe he's not prolapsed, maybe just give him a few minutes. It turns out he was prolapsed. I got it back in. I don't put him back in with a female for the rest of the season. He does good for the rest of the year. The following season, I try again. Immediately, the same thing happens. So now I'm only left with the female, and so that's where it went. That's where this stuff is descended, is from that one female to begin with. But it took me, even if that was a melanistic. Okay, so I took her babies, I tried them back to her, nothing. No relations, didn't get it repeated, none of that kind of stuff. This is why I say I would hesitate to call it melanistic until 2 things: until you can prove it's repeatable, and then when they do repeat, the babies are in fact just as dark and stay that way. Then you would know.
That's exciting. So exciting to have a project like that and to um, get so close to proving it out, especially with 3 babies. You've got to, in your mind, in the back of your mind, you've got to be thinking, I'm there. Got it. This is something I've worked on for a long, 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 long time. Finally got it. And then the frustration of losing the one and then having the other male prolapse has just got to be heart-wrenching.
Well,
It's got to be terrible.
I would even question the odds of being able to again, unless it's a dominant or a co-dominant mutation, right? If it's a genetic that works along the same lines as the genetics for
Recessive.
everything else,
Yeah.
you could have, or it could be all right. So the black eyes, the phantom eyes. At this point, I firmly believe that almost every single gargoyle contains the genetics for phantom eyes. But going back to what they do in the wild. Okay, so gargoyles are an apex predator. They're living 30 years or more. I would argue they're probably, how many do that in the wild, but they're capable of doing 30 years.
Yep.
As far as we know right now, they're isolated to the lower 2/3 of the island. They are inbreeding without question. All right. And so how does Mother Nature deal with that? This is the randomness that we see. So instead of the offspring reflecting the genetics of mom and dad, the offspring reflect the genetics of the entire species. So the analogy that I would use, real simple, like dice. If you've got 6 dice, I don't care how many times you roll it, all 6 of those, and each one of those numbers, right? 1 through 5 is a set of genetics. So every time you roll the dice, all 6 of those genetics are available every single roll. But to get the black eyes, you've got to have 6 sixes, all right, or 6 fives, or whatever, right? So
Yeah.
how many times you got to roll? But the genetics are still there. I think that's the easiest analogy for these guys. The genetics are there. It's just how many rolls does it take to get them? The more you stack those genes, the more that roll is in your favor.
Obviously, a great way to kind of point that out, and especially what we've seen again with the crested world in the last 10 years, 15 years or so, with, oh, I got the all 5s roll. Now I have one. Now I have one. Now I can kind of work with that one and kind of try to prove it out. Is it codom? Is it recessive? Is it line bred?
Mm-hmm.
But at least you have something in your hand that you can go, okay, the female phenotype is this, and I've got that right here. Now I just have to work the whole process out. I remember Steve Sykes from Geckos, etc., talking about something that should have been a, I don't know, 1 in 1.25, and it took him 7 years to prove out, and
Mhm.
until he finally got that. So my gosh, that's what we need in the hobby, is somebody dedicated like that.
Exactly.
But that's hard. That's hard. 7 years working on one flippin' animal, one project. Oh my
Hmm.
gosh. Um,
Well, I mean,
tough, tough, tough.
depending on the type of genetics you're aiming for, I mean, like in the gargoyles, it's one of the reasons. So, I don't, some people listening might have already gathered it by our talk already, but when I'm shooting for the gargoyles, I typically shoot for only, because it's so random and there are so many traits in question. When I'm shooting for something, I typically for that goal, it's only one thing. I'm only trying to modify one thing, and all the other things I don't really care about, because if I can get control of that one thing, then I can move to the next thing. And so once we've done this 10 times, now I can control 10 different traits and make hopefully the idea making, I can make whatever I want.
Do you not though think, and I do this all the time with a period or a Picta, I do the same thing, Paul, where I'll go, okay, I just want more red. I just want more red.
Mhm.
And then I do the red, 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 red. And then it's like, maybe, Xanthic has to be part of that somewhere. Maybe I have to have an Xanthic in this equation somewhere. Am I just randomly doing stuff right now without any means, So you go through that process where you start thinking maybe there's another combination that will eventually, is there a combination that will make, a female a male period or a Picta? Maybe I'm just, because I've gotten all males. Every single one is a male. So what am I missing? There's got to be something that I'm
Temperature,
missing there. Huh?
incubation temperature. What do you
I've tried them
incubate at?
all.
What do you
Uh,
incubate at?
Everything. I've tried from, low 90s down into the, I don't even know anymore, but low 70s, maybe high 60s ish.
Low 70s will favor you females. When the
Yep.
Pictus A males first came out, everybody that I contacted that had them, they said it's male only. And to me, okay, if you can't prove it, I don't buy it. And I
Yes.
don't know
Yes.
any other animal that albinism is linked to sex. So I took my Pictus and I started dropping the temperature on them and dropping the temperature on them, and I get to 71 degrees, and guess what? I start hatching out male females left and right. I got snow females left and right. So it's not genetic. I mean, it's not albinism and sex are not linked. It's incubation temperature. So, and I know they're straying a little bit, but my passion for Pictus. So
Yes. Yeah.
back in the days, I would lose most of my adults after 2 years. Right? They just
Oh,
die, and
yeah.
I can't figure out why. I was keeping them at like 81, 82 degrees. When I started hatching females out at 71, 72 degrees, I started thinking, well, if 71, 72 is the median between female and male, then maybe the geckos in real life should be kept closer to 71, 72 degrees. And so now I keep my Pictus the same temperatures as all my Rhacodactylus, and I got Pictus that are living 8, 9, 10 years. So now production has gone way, way down, right?
Yeah.
They don't produce nearly as much, but they're living way longer. So yeah, I think try lower temperatures. Go down to the low 70s.
We're that close to making this another 2-hour session only on period or Picta, right? And I
We could easily go that direction. I
easily,
think I like those just as much as the gargoyles.
oh my gosh.
I will never not, if I have geckos, as long as I have geckos, I will have Pictus.
I've heard that. I've heard somebody say that before. Oh, wait, it was me. As long as I have geckos, I will always have period
Yeah,
or Picta.
yeah,
Absolutely. They're my
they're
favorite
awesome.
by far. We'll have a separate conversation. We'll
Okay.
we'll we'll chat on that later. Um, a lot of information here on Gargoyle Geckos. I think we've taken it from A to Z. I don't know if I'm sure we missed something. People, if you have questions, put them in the comments. I'll get a hold of Paul. I'll see if I can answer anything if I can, but I'll get a hold of Paul and we'll get your questions answered if we missed anything. Paul, if I missed anything, asking you, please, right now is a great opportunity to kind of bring it up and kind of talk about it. Um, can you think of anything
I
offhand?
think we covered all the basics. As far as the morphs, because we did touch on the morphs.
Yeah, yeah.
So besides the retic and the stripe, right now there's two that I've seen in gargoyles that I would call other morphs. That's
Okay,
the white ones.
okay,
I
okay,
don't know if they're amelanistic or hypomelanistic. I tend to lean more toward amelanistic or something completely different.
okay.
Um, and then I've seen online. I don't remember where it was. Um, Maybe the Ukraine it was somewhere in Europe. Somebody had a gargoyle that they didn't know what it was. They posted pictures. What it looked like to me, it looked like you're a Pictus guy. You know the translucent Pictus. It looked like
Yeah.
the same trait in gargoyles.
Holy cow. Oh, I remember
Translucent and
hearing
black
about
eyes.
that.
Yeah,
Yes. I think I did see that picture. I probably have it saved on my hard drive somewhere.
actually,
That was weird.
that's what I think. You see the cresteds that are coming out now. The
Yeah.
hypos.
Yep.
Um, and even the agricoli. There's a melanistic one out there. I think when I look at
Yes.
the agricola, I think that's translucent also. And the reason it looks melanistic is because they are naturally the trait, this translucent trait is missing the white. So hypoaristic, right? So the white iridophores make the white. So if the translucent is missing the white, it's hypoiridic. You have an animal just like the original dragons that have a lot of melon. You take away the white, they look dirty and dark and they look like what you maybe call melanistic. But if you see other melanistic animals, they don't look the same. The other melanistic animals are jet black.
Yes. Yes. Wow. Wow.
And I think those cresteds, the hypos that are
Yeah.
coming out and they're calling leucistics, I think those are because they have black eyes. They also
Yeah.
have black eyes and they look translucent to me. I think that's the same thing.
We're, excuse me, as a hobby, we're opening so many doors here. It's hard to keep track of this. And I feel as well that and we should be opening these doors and we should be
Sure.
understanding, we should be gaining knowledge. Um, from a leopard gecko standpoint, obviously we opened too many doors and now we have to close some doors. And I think that that's the case with crested geckos as well, but we don't know until we know.
Right.
And we might not know with the gargoyle until we know.
Well,
And it's
some of that
certainly, we've got to
probably
go down that path.
comes with the recessive codom and dominant traits, and so far there aren't any of those in gargoyles, but those are generally the traits that encourage heavy line breeding and stuff like that.
Yes, exactly.
But you know what,
Very exciting.
in new cows, not that I condone it. I mean, not that I'm for it. I mean, I've expressed it many times. In my collection, I tried not to breed animals that are related anything closer than 3 generations. But the reality, at least in the new cows, honestly, man, they're inbreeding in the wild. They're doing it naturally, and Mother Nature has dealt with that naturally. So I don't see a
Yeah.
problem with it. It's just why. That's the only thing is why.
Yep. Yep. Right. Right. That's a great point. You have to have a very, very clear,
Right.
specific, defined, controlled reason why you're doing that. Good
Right.
point. Wow. Wow. Really, really good point. Um, yeah, I think we've covered. Oh, you know what? I do want to cover one other thing, and I've held you here for a long time, Paul.
No
This will
worries.
be really super quick.
I love talking
Um,
reptiles.
I know this could be 4 or 5 more hours, easy. Um, the male dominance. Do I call it male dominance? The temperature sex determined male. Maybe it's not temperature. Maybe it's controlled by the male having a male dominant. You know, I'm certainly not saying this the right way, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Males control the sex of the male, and you could have a male that produces more baby
Yeah.
males.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
do you think about that?
No, in gargoyles, I'm absolutely convinced male controls sex. It's genetic. Not all males are the same. You know, there are some males that will never produce a male. There are some males that produce them randomly here and there, and then rarer, but they still exist, are males that produce nothing but males, for sure.
Year after year after year, in my earlier years, I could not produce a male. Could
Sure.
not. Temperature change, keeping them warmer. I tried a lot of things, and not that it was anything was in control, but I would get maybe one male every 20, 25 animals.
Hmm.
And it became frustrating from holdbacks and everything like that. But um, now this year, well, the last couple 3 years, I'm getting a good mix after introducing other bloodlines and everything. So I've got to say the same thing, I guess, with that, but I wouldn't say it because I don't have any control over the date, the lines and everything. I couldn't go back and say, oh, this is why right here,
Well,
if that makes sense.
I think because I'm even hatching more than I've ever. The first 10 years that I was, because I was trying to figure it out, and I was holding back 300 babies every year. The first 10 years, I never saw more than 2% male across the board. And so I started like going, even this, now this is when I'm doing the incubation experiments. And there's no correlation between temperature and incubation, because I had males pop out when I was incubating at like 70, and then I had males pop out at 90, or high 80s. So clearly, temperature wasn't a direct reflection on that. When I started going back through my notes, I started to see a trend where the males were coming from the same group. And so then the deeper you look, the males are, and at that time too, I wasn't doing quite the same thing I'm doing now. I didn't have as many males, so I would take one male and sometimes cycle him through several different groups.
Sure.
And so looking at it further in depth, I started noticing that all the males I was getting primarily were coming from one or two, male breeders, and that's it. And so that started the watching the males and keeping track of that kind of stuff. Only it wasn't until I moved back to Florida, so this is within 7 years, when I started dating Kelly, and we both started looking for these in our collection. Both of us each identified. She had two, and I had one. That it didn't. I mean, it didn't matter how I put it with 10 females, and I got 100% babies.
Wow.
And it was the same thing for her. So it didn't. I mean, that's not. When you put them with that many females, you can't say that it has anything to do with temperature.
No.
That is genetic.
I'm all about sample size. So if I do something and I have two or three animals that are doing something different, it doesn't hold anything. You
Right.
have to have a good sample
A
size.
good group.
100 babies, that's a
Yeah.
good sample size.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Wow.
once we identified, we realized that this was happening. My next question is, okay, this was what stirred this was the 100% developers. The next question was, okay, if I have a male that's making 100% babies, how many of those babies then also are male makers, to what degree? The ones we kept back, I don't want to say we're 100% because we didn't give them that sort of opportunity, to go across the board. But I can tell you that of all the males that we held back from those, they were all heavy, heavy male producers, and enough that I could assume that they're probably 100% male producers or pretty close. So then if you take that piece of information, this would then also explain, okay, if all males are not created equal and you have some that are half and then some that are 100%, this could very easily explain why we are seeing more males across the board, across the country, across the hobby in general. Because now in the wild, these animals, if a male goes and breeds 15 females, how many of those offspring grow up to contribute to the gene pool? All right, so probably not very many. So
Yep.
I think that
Yep.
I think the only reason we're getting these 100% males is because we had originally had those males that made a couple here and there, and we kept everything. Those, whatever they breed, everything grows up and goes into the gene pool, and so.
Yep.
You keep doing that over and over and again, and it's just like the gene stacking. You start getting more and more male, where in the wild they wouldn't exist. They'd be cold. In captivity, more and more males exist. Therefore, the odds of male makers increase with every generation, especially if it's not kept in check. But the problem is the 100% male makers, because
Yeah.
if that goes on unchecked and people don't realize, I foresee a time where females could be very, very difficult to come by.
Oh my!
And we're going toward that trend. We're running that way. So
Tons of questions, and these are all, so many theoretical. Like, does this apply to other animals? And to your point, how do we control that? Do we now have to call it a super hypotangerine keratil male
male
maker?
maker.
And label it with every single animal that we're producing and then selling,
Yeah.
which probably we need to, I guess.
Yeah. The problem with that is the time it takes to understand that, right? I mean, so to
Yes.
understand that, you'd have to raise up the majority of the babies from any individual male, at least for 2 years till you could sex it, and then go from that point. So, I mean, to understand that in your collection, it would probably take you 2 or 3 generations. So you're looking at 6 to 10 years to understand that, maybe. I mean,
So
depending
you
on
would do it.
on your size,
Yep. So somebody like you would do it. I don't know if I'm at the right size to be able to do something like that, but you're talking about a handful of gargoyle keepers that could do this. The general population will never ever,
No,
work
no.
more than a couple of years on the genetics at all, unfortunately. But it is what
No,
it
but
is.
for anybody who is breeding, I would encourage you to try to keep track, the
Yes.
best you can. And if you find that you are hatching a lot of males, then I would seriously consider, what you do with the father to those animals, and maybe swap him out for somebody else.
Well said. Very well said. A lot of information, folks. Tons of information. Probably a little bit deeper than maybe some of you wanted, some of you expected. Um, wow, Paul, you're a wealth of information. We're honored to have you on our
Thank
show
you.
today. Thank you so much. Hey, tell people how they can find you on social media, reptile shows,
Yeah,
etc.
any of the Repticons in Florida. Well, I do the big ones anyway. Atlanta, we do some shows in Atlanta, up the East Coast a little bit. I'm not doing the Chicago show anymore. That one's a little rough on all of us.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Social media, Facebook is probably my number one. Instagram under my name, and then Morph Market under RhacHouse.
And folks, we'll have all of the links in the description of this video, so you can go check out RhacHouse, the RhacHouse. Little name change
Yes.
there recently.
Yes.
Very cool. Very cool.
If
We'll have
if
all the. Go ahead.
if anybody listening has liked RhacHouse in the past and has been a minute since you've been there, unfortunately Facebook shut that page down, and I had to start over. So now is the RhacHouse. So
There
swing
you
by and
go.
give us a like.
Go down to the description, check out those links, and like all of them. Like them all. Just start hitting the like button over and over and over again. like 20 or 30 times. That's what I do. Thank you very much, Paul. It's been great. Wealth of information. This is exactly the type of information I'm hoping we can produce here on Supreme Gecko for folks. And it's, all about you giving that information and being so willing to share. Thank you
Thank you for
so
the
much.
opportunity.
My pleasure.
Next
Bye-bye,
time we can
everybody.
pick this.
Next time with Pictus.
All right. Thank you, sir.